Driving innovation with Innersouce. My name is Fatin Hiri. I'm very happy and super excited to be part of the first UXDX community events in Australia. I'm a solution engineer at GitHub based in Sydney. Developers work with designers to build product, salespeople sell the product, and us as solution engineers, we bridge that gap between these two teams. This is my Octocat. She loves coffee as much as I do. And if you like my Octocat, you can also build your own. Just go to myoctocat.com and have some fun. This is our agenda for today. We cannot talk about Innersouce without having a short section about open source first, then Innersouce, the what, why, and how. Few examples from real customer stories, and then we will wrap up with a section called What's in it for me. Let's get started. Open source. Let's start by defining open source software. It's a type of computer software in which the source code is released under a permissive license, allowing users the right to use, study, change, and distribute the software to anyone and for any purpose. Now, the next question is, why open source software? As from the software composition report, you know that today 99% of organizations are leveraging open source software, and 80 to 90% of the new modern application development consists of open source software. Regardless of the programming language or technology stack, when you are building a new application, only a small percentage of your code comes from your own in-house code. The rest comes from the open source libraries you are taking in as dependencies. And that's a good thing. It means you don't have to implement a library for sorting list or executing mathematical operations. The rest, the 10%, represents your own IP, your own intellectual property. And this is what differs you from others. This is the true unique code that your developers are writing in-house. And where does most of the open source projects live? On GitHub. GitHub is the go-to platform when we talk about open source software. As you know, GitHub has over 50 million monthly active developers, maintainers, and enterprise users. Anybody looking to consume or contribute to open source is on GitHub. GitHub is truly the home of open source. And there's more than 128 million projects on GitHub to choose from. If we check the top open source projects, number one is the Microsoft Visual Studio Code with over 19K, followed by the Azure documentations. Then you've got Flutter by Google for cross-platform app development on Android, iOS, and others. And number 5, you've got TensorFlow for machine learning with close to 10K. Now that we got to the Innersouce section, this is an exciting section dedicated for enterprises. We spoke about open source. Now let's start with Innersouce. We'll start with a definition. What is Innersouce first? Innersouce takes the lessons learned from developing open source software and applies them to the way companies develop software internally, inside their organization. In other words, it's the application of the open source principles within your organization. You can say it's like the projects are internally open source and you want to discover and contribute to those projects, like people do the same on github.com today. Now that's what Innersouce, but what are the problems people are facing? What are they trying to solve that's making Innersouce so popular? What are the enterprise and open source common challenges? First of all, if we look at the average enterprise, most people struggle with communication across division and even between teams under the same department. There's a lack of understanding often in teams around the open source style or workflow, how to use it. But probably sometimes it's a lack of experience in using pull requests maybe. Lots of organizations struggle with communication and awareness of existing enterprise development within the same organization. We also have a different type of challenge inside some organizations where people have that code ownership. That means that when it comes to their code, they don't think that they are the maintainer of the code. They think about their code like it's my code, it's my team's code, my department owns this code. But in reality, it's owned by the entire organization, and you are only the maintainer. You are looking after that code to make sure that only good code makes it to production. So here is a list of the common pain points that we've seen when it comes to Innersouce. This is not the whole list, but obviously some of the pain points. And first one is multiple version control system. Different systems in place, and they don't even integrate. They don't talk to each other. And this is one of the first blockers against collaboration. The tools that you are using inside your organization. Code and metadata not searchable. So additionally to the struggle of knowing what's being developed is closely followed by where's the code? How do I get access to that? Why is there no documentation here? Organization knowledge share. How are handoffs facilitated as people join or leave organizations or different teams? How is tribal knowledge of legacy systems preserved? Documentation. If it exists, it might be in another system apart from code, which is also sometimes not very searchable. Organizational distance. How do developers find one another? How do they work with one another? How do they help one another? Organizational distance always causes more and more bugs as per a Microsoft study. Now that we spoke about the pain points, let's dig a bit more into the inner source principle. First, open culture, creating a level playing field for the open sharing of work, ideas, feedback, and ensuring culture and strategic alignment. Because open collaboration encourages more contribution, the same way that it works for open source projects, where you can accept changes from anybody in the world. And that's a lot of brain power right here for one single project. The same way Innersouce requires a culture shift. Your team's culture will need to encourage knowledge sharing and welcome contributions from across your organization. Transparency. Ensure that the process as well as the product itself is visible. So this can be achievable by decoupling communications from time and space. So opening up the project is not enough. Innersouce is not just the code becoming visible, but as well as the process and the decision-making behind it. Discoverability, sharing work and making it easy for others to discover, use, and contribute to your code. Developers don't always have to start from scratch, and Innersouce code helps your team discover, customize, reuse existing internal projects. So people from another department can even use an internal project that you have, build other things based on that, or maybe modify a little bit so it will suit their own specific needs. Innovation as like Innersouce is an amazing conduit for learning and exchanging ideas and facilitating innovation. Innersouce brings more ideas to the tables. Teams can more easily innovate in that scenario. And that will lead us to the Innersouce goals section, where we will talk about solutions now. How? First, reuse. Encourage the natural desire to contribute to other code in an open source sense. That satisfaction users get from contributing to other projects, celebrated. Collaboration, breaking silos. I know silos won't always go away, as sometimes things need to be private, but all of us sometimes have to challenge this. So if we want to achieve our goals. Community, the same way that we've seen the open source communities, try to build your own community inside your organization. And all of that will lead to better software and faster. Better as like you will have more people, more eyes checking the code, and you can build faster as you might get code suggestion from members from outside your team. We understand now some of the problems. We've discussed what Innersouce is set out to achieve. How do we get there? Now let's talk about some tips and tricks for implementing an Innersouce culture. Driving innovation through customer focus, fast iteration, open communication, grassroots ideas, low risk experimentation, security-centered development and operations, adoption of an inner source culture, innovation from all directions. That means being open to ideas from all different departments, all different teams. When everyone can see what you are building, they get an idea, they can go do some experiment in their own safe experiment environment. It might be in their own branch without affecting the main production code. And then they can give you suggestions in the form of a pull request, for example. Shift left mindset. And this can be applied in a few different angles. The shift left from a security perspective, where you can run code scanning, security scanning, once the developers are pushing code at the pull request level. At the same time, we want to be open to get all these innovative ideas, but you want to make sure that you are doing all of that under the security and compliance umbrella. Shift left in the DevOps concept, where you are automatically running your tests, automated workflows with CI/CD. Sharing, we spoke about that now a few times, where being open about your project, sharing your code, and being welcome to anyone who would like to contribute back to your code. Let's take an example. Please meet Rachel. She's a new software engineer, very ambitious, and on her first day or maybe week at work, she came up with an idea. It might be a great idea, it might not be, but the point here is that she's sharing her idea with her team. And the response she got was like, we tried that before and it didn't work. Okay. This is a great example of how, first of all, she's not learning from previous developer experience. And this is how a discussion gets totally killed, gets totally stopped. It goes nowhere from here. And maybe Rachel, next time she has a really new and unique idea, she might not even share it with the team. Let's take a step back and consider the same scenario where Rachel shared her idea with the team. She gets the same response from another senior developer saying, we tried that before and it didn't work. But this time, the difference is that she got an issue thread or a pull request thread where she can go read the whole conversation and understand the reasoning behind it. Sometimes things change, and what was bad at that time might be a good idea now. But you can see here, it's an open space where she can share her opinion in that thread as well. That's the way as she can learn from other experienced developers, and that will make her a better asset for the company later on. We have a saying at GitHub, if it doesn't have a URL, that means it didn't happen. Internally at GitHub, GitHub is used by all different teams from marketing, support, sales, everything will create an issue, a pull request if they want to make a change. Now, another way to think about any project community is through what we call a contribution funnel. The top of the funnel consists of the consumers or users, the one who are using your project. They might make a copy, fork the code, or use it in their own project. Contributors are the ones who might contribute to the project by logging a bug, requesting a feature, adding some documentation, as well as they might contribute by writing some code, some tests, building a new feature maybe, or fixing the bug that they reported. And we can see at the end of the funnel is actually becoming a maintainer. It's a position where you are actively involved and influencing the direction of the project. So when implementing Innersouce, we need to think about these specific users. The first one, the consumers. Most people looking at your project just consume it. They might just go ahead, download the software, use it, and they might not come back maybe. If it doesn't work for them, 100% they might not even come back. And that's fine. That's what Innersouce is about. At least for them, it's helped them. They find something, they consumed it. Maybe it solved a problem for them. And that's brilliant because that's how we can improve productivity. And that's really fantastic. A very small percentage of these consumers might come back and they might contribute time in a way that your job as the maintainer of your code base is to maximize the number of people that go from consumption to contribution. So to do so, you'll need to make it easier for people to consume your software. You want to have a good README file. You want to make it easy to download, install, not too many prerequisites. You want to have a screenshot that shows people what they will get when they install the software. That sort of thing to maximize the people in the top of the funnel. and then you will make it easy to contribute back. A very small percentage of these people will actually contribute via code. That means that they will write code and submit it back into your project. And this is extremely helpful. This is how you can build your internal community inside your organization. Now, when people do contribute code back to your project, you want to be very welcoming to them. You want to make sure that you are responding to their pull request. You are giving them good feedback. You have some tests that you are running on that pull request. You're giving them that quick feedback if the code in that pull request will get accepted or not. And that will lead maybe later on down the track for them to become maintainers. So you want to make sure that you are providing people opportunities to become maintainers and to influence the future or the product direction of your project. So that's the contribution funnel. And you want to make sure that you want to bring more people to that funnel so you can get more and more useful contribution to your project that you are sharing internally. I'm going to share a few more tips that you can benefit from when you are implementing an inner source culture. First one is internal repositories. So when it's possible, use internal repositories. In other words, keep your repositories open. So users under your organization only, of course, can access these repositories. You can use internal repositories to practice inner source within your enterprise, within your organization. So members of your enterprise can collaborate using that open source methodology without having to share any of your IP publicly, without having to share any of your intellectual property publicly. README. Every project normally has a README file, and the README usually should be clear, simple, straightforward, as it consists of the instructions on how to download, how to run, how to deploy your project. On top of that, treat your README as a constitution in a way that your README is not just that set of instructions, but it's a place to talk about your goals, your product vision, your roadmap. Contributing.mds. This is also recommended to be used when having internal repositories, the same way that we have it in the open source world. So you can try to help new contributors get started. Templates. You can make a good use of all the different types of templates that you have. You can create issue template to make it easier for contributors to provide all the required information in the issue when reporting a bug or requesting a feature, giving the replication steps, maybe screenshots, operator system browser, all of these details. Same concept applies for when creating a pull request. So you can create a pull request template. So you can normalize that communication when contributors are suggesting changes to your code, to your repository. Repository template. So anyone with the admin access can make a repository a template. So users can generate new repositories using that template with the same directory, structure, and files. Discussions. This is a new feature. Discussions is a new way for software communities to collaborate within a repository alongside issues and pull requests. So discussions, issues, and pull requests, they all live in one place on GitHub. All of them close to your code, close to where your code sits. Discussions are a great place for Q&A. And by using GitHub discussions to do Q&A, you can later on maybe gather this information to populate your FAQ document. And last one is secure automated workflow. So we spoke about open culture, trying to share internally as much as possible. But at the same time, you want to make sure that not everyone within your organization can go ahead and delete or force push code to production, for example. So you can set some rules that will help you practice inner source without messing up everything. Some of these features are protected branches, where you can enable several protected branches settings to enforce various workflows before a branch can be merged. If required status check are enabled on the branch, you won't be able to merge changes into the branch until all of the required CI test passes, for example. Or pull request review, where you can specify, I want at least 2 people to review this code, to approve the code before it makes it to the main branch. You can have code owner, where you can specify the owners for specific type of files, for example, and as a Code owner, they must approve the pull request before it can get merged. You can benefit from all of these ones, as well as GitHub Actions for CI/CD, automation as well as automating any process of your software development lifecycle. With advanced security, GitHub Advanced Security, you can also make sure that your code is getting scanned for security vulnerabilities at the pull request level. I wanted to share some examples of companies who have seen the benefit of fostering an inner source culture. Productivity, performance, time to market, and cost savings are just few of the benefits that can be achieved through inner sourcing. When your team is focused on that 10%, your unique intellectual property, IP, through inner source, you are in a strong position to accelerate innovation, increase your team productivity, and increase your competitive differentiation. Ford is a great example of how inner source has eliminated an us versus them mentality through providing a secure environment that encourages people to collaborate and work together. Ford had a developer in their business working on speedometers who was very keen and very interested in AI. The manager for the AI project found that most of the commits for their public AI project were made by that developer who's from outside their team. And using the GitHub data, they were able to offer that extremely talented person a job inside the AI team, making the best use of that talent. Because of their culture because of this open culture by default, it allowed this developer to access the AI repositories. They were able to access the skills they needed from within their organization. Another great example from IAG, which is one of the largest insurance companies in Australia and New Zealand. Historically, developers at IAG used a variety of version control and code management tools. Some were even sending code back and forth in email attachments. Then their team started moving to GitHub organically. Having that one version control system in place that encourages collaboration is the first step toward a healthy inner source environment. Recently, SAP open sourced their inner source project portal, so other enterprises can benefit from it. Each tile in that project portal represents an inner source project. So the list of projects can be filtered by programming languages or anything, as well as it can be searchable. You can also have it published as a GitHub private page, which is another feature that became GA recently. And the last one that I want to share, this is not a customer story, but I wanted to share this video from UXDX a couple of months back, where my colleague, Kate Simpson, she talked about how to be a great remote product manager. But at the same time, in that video, she shared some great tips on how teams can collaborate and work together. And now the big question coming to your mind is like, what's in it for me? Some of you might be saying, this is all theory, it won't work in my organization. We are far away from all of that. But let me tell you something. This is a very common misconception. I gave you some success customer stories, but there's one more that I didn't share yet, which is Microsoft. If you go back 5, 10 years ago, you will never even thought that Microsoft will have anything to do with inner source. And look at Microsoft now. They have this open culture internally as well as externally. Visual Studio Code is open source, and Microsoft became one of the top open source contributors, as well as big advocate for inner source. A few tips here. If you are leading a team or you have some influence on the leadership team decisions, try to be an advocate and push for this type of change, as like having this executive leadership vision and support will make your whole organization inner source journey a bit easier. If you are maintaining a project, try to celebrate any contribution someone from outside your team or your department makes. That satisfaction can encourage others as well. If you are working on a project, give your team few suggestions or changes to make. Maybe start by changing the repository visibility to internal when possible. You might think, oh no, my code needs a lot of work before sharing it, but guess what? If it's working, that's fine. You don't need to tidy up the code and make it perfect before sharing. That's not really the point here. Documentation. Improve your project documentation. Don't say my code is my documentation. That might make sense to you right now, but it won't make sense to someone else who's trying to pick up your project in a year or two, or maybe more. You might think, why will I bother with that whole inner source thing if I'm going to get one or more, 1, 2, or even 3 maybe contributors from outside of my team? But remember when you spoke about the productivity improvement, when someone might just consume your code in their project and it will make their life easier. That's how you are indirectly contributing to productivity improvement in your whole organization. The situation might be reversed one day, and you might be the one using that other team code and benefiting from it. Some of you might be working for financial industries or government, and you might think that this is going to be very challenging for us to have that open culture. But if you dig a bit more, you might find some libraries or some algorithms or some small projects that are not considered top secret, and they can be shared internally. I have seen it done very successfully in some banks globally, as well as in our APAC region. As a conclusion, everyone wants to change, not the world, but maybe the organization where they work, but together with your colleagues, with your coworkers from all over the organization, you can work together to get there faster and make a better impact. I would like to share some resources with you. I'll be sharing the slides as well at the end so you can get access to all of these links. And at the end, I just want to say thank you for watching and thank you for your time.